Canadian filmmaker. And within Canada, you're not a Canadian filmmaker. You're just a filmmaker. But to every single other country in the world, that distinction of you being Canadian is really important. And that's kind of cool. Like, I found that my identity, and I imagine yours as well, like all your early stuff played Berlin exclusively. And in Berlin, you're a Canadian making movies. And in America, I'm a Canadian making movies. And this, although it's a movie about pure Americana, premiered at like the biggest American film festival. And that really was important because it gave it a certain kind of identity that it just would not get here. And I think you're gonna find this if you continue to work in the arts or almost anything that you work in, is that international recognition for anything that you're doing, even in the world of science, is so important to Canadians because we as a culture have a really hard time saying to the rest of the world, no, this really is good. Like, we really are proud of this. Internally, it's, again, just like talking to your friend, you're like, oh yeah, we love it. But then as soon as you are talking to your other friends, and they're like, so how was Mike's movie? You're like, yeah, it was bad. Oh my God, it was really bad. And that culture, you extend that out and it really does exist here. Whereas if somebody else, like, to use this analogy, beat it to death, but if some like really cool person that you knew outside your friend group was like, Mike's movie is incredible. This is the best movie you've ever seen in your life. You would have a much easier time being like, I love this movie. It's incredible. And I'm not saying it's a good system, but it very much is the system we have. And you will find that exists at almost every level of analysis in this country, which is not bad. It's actually kind of cool. It just means that you need to kind of work towards international festivals. If you want to know about that, ask Kaz. He really is the master. He knows all about that. Yes?
Sorry, just to clarify your point a little bit, is that you're saying that's Canadian audiences to Canadian filmmakers? They like pat them on the back because they're Canadian?
I'm talking specifically about the critical reception and the professional reception of Canadian work. Crack open any newspaper and read the reviews around TIFF or around any festival and see how the Canadian films get treated.
And I would say it's like twofold. Like, I would say it's Canadian filmmakers being afraid to say anything about their peers.
Of course.
And then at the same time, it's sort of the feeling, it's the same as if you were to go to Germany. You wouldn't necessarily want to watch films in the German section.
Exactly.
Currently, you wouldn't want to watch
This is not distinctly and only Canadian. This is an excellent point.
And the people sort of second guess it and just assume that this is sort of the charity section.
You don't want to be the French filmmaker premiering your movie at Cannes.
Maybe that's an exception. Maybe it's an exception to Sundance too, where
well, Sundance is, of course, the rules don't apply.
But certainly Italy, certainly
Locarno's a great example.
Switzerland, yeah.
So it does travel. I mean, like every single country in the world, whether we like it or not, is going to have an inferiority complex culturally to the United States of America. This is an unescapable reality that we have in our world. Again, you can say there's all kinds of problems with that. You could disagree with it completely, but you really do need to play by the rules of the planet you're on, unfortunately. And so that just exists, that America, for whatever reason, and the American curatorial system in that, like film festivals, what they think is great, what movies break through, what Hollywood producers are willing to fund, that should influence your decisions if you're thinking about making work in a commercial sense. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be like, well, fuck that, I'm not gonna ever make commercial movies ever. But if you're thinking of trying to make films that are going to break through in any type of commercial space, however you view it, right? However you do that, you should be thinking about where you're premiering your work. And that, to round around to the question you asked, that's why we did all our stuff in the States.
And it's been sort of an ongoing conversation in Canada, or just what do we do with Canadian films? We just have taken this sort of morph over the years that they've had Canadian sections, they've had Canada First Section,
And then this
10 films by baby directors in the next year, just 4. And what's crazy about it is no one notices. It's almost the biggest thing that I found terrifying, even with short films too, that TIFF used to accept 50 Canadian short films.
And then they
accept
change,
10.
yeah.
The public doesn't notice that difference.
Well, because of source, they
So
don't care.
what I'm leading towards too, no one cares, and it's so hard to get this conversation going. There was a brief moment where you were at the center of this conversation, and sort of talking to Telefilm, and I'm just, I don't even know where I'm going with this question, but maybe it's just a way for us to talk about how you making your first 2 films led to working with Telefilm and helping change policy.
But, well, it was, I think, exactly that I think so openly critical in the press of this same conversation we're having now, which is basically the Canadian filmmaking system is a joke. And that, for the most part, funding in this country is run by a very, very, very small company, like a crown corporation, that you could accuse of being out of touch in moments. And so I don't know why, but for whatever reason they asked me and my producer if we would come and basically consult on how to change that. And the first thing that we changed was we made it so that now juries pick what first features get made in Canada, because it seemed like that was where all the creative work was being done anyway. All of Kaz's movies, all of Kaz's friends' movies were all being made as first features, filmmakers using their own money. Exclusively. I would say that there was 0 first features being funded by the country that were interested, like 0. And that was a big problem. And first features, as I'm sure you're realizing, like are actually pretty cheap to make, like in the grand scheme of movies. Like you can make a first feature for very little money if you're willing to be quite scrappy. And so it was like obvious in a way that why wouldn't telefilm just give like a huge number of filmmakers less money and let those filmmakers be chosen by
It's kind of fascinating.
filmmakers.
It's almost a budget of one feature film that divided up amongst
Exactly.
filmmakers. A follow-up question?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask then how you think about like identifying yourself. Like, are you ever hesitant to call yourself a Canadian filmmaker?
No way. In fact, I think it's so cool. One of the great things about being a Canadian is that everybody's like, what? If you ever travel outside of this country, specifically to film festivals, especially if you're traveling on the identity of your own work, oh my gosh, you're going to realize this in a big way, that Canadian filmmakers that get programmed in international festivals that aren't from Quebec, there exists like none of them. There's complete rarity. And so there's something special about that. Oh, yeah, and we have a Canadian film. Like they're so happy to introduce Canadian films, to basically say, oh, here's a Canadian filmmaker. And there's some advantages to it because outside of Canada, people have no idea what that even means. Like, what is the Canadian identity? That's, I'm sure, something you're trying to get at in this class at a certain level. But the idea of, you can characterize German cinema in some fairly like cliche, jokey ways. Same with French cinema, even like Australian cinema. There's been enough big major movies between like Mad Max and Walkabout. Like there's movies that can be like, oh yeah, Australian movies. Those are crazy, but it just doesn't really exist in this country, and that's kind of cool because it means that you actually get to define what a Canadian film is, and that's pretty new territory. Like we're one of the newest countries in the world, and we still do not really have a very strong international identity apart from being like, I guess, sort of soft, nice, right? Like what is the international Canadian identity? So you get to make a lot of those definitions on your own and surprise people. I love telling people I'm Canadian. It's cool. Now, it's not so cool if you want to like move to Los Angeles and be a certain kind of like American filmmaker. Like then you're going to be an outsider, and that's not always so great because then it's easy to look down on you, and like that's tough. I can't speak from experience, but that's what I see. I see some people that we know who are like, I'm going to go live in LA for 6 months, and I'm going to try to get in the writer's room, or I'm going to try to work with my agent to try to get something going. And then maybe you can see it as something bad. But I'll tell you something, as soon as you start trying to actually make money as a filmmaker, being Canadian is great because you get all these insane tax benefits, like you can apply to telefilm, like Americans have nothing like that. There are a lot of advantages to being in this country, so long as you're willing to work within the system, then it's great. But if you don't want to do that, then I imagine it could be a burden of identity. Yes, I mean an identity of burden. Yeah.
So we've talked about telefilm as a major funding source of Canadian cinema, but are there independent sources of funding?
So the way films primarily are funded in this are, I would say, feature films exclusively through telefilm, or you've seen some movies in this class funded by the NFB, the National Film Board. But the culture of that place has completely changed from the years of Domino. Like it's not the same. Now they're funding exclusively documentaries, and the scale of it is totally different than what they were doing before. Like you're not going to be making like fiction feature work at the NFB. Chelsea McMullen, have you talked about her? But she's like a good example of a filmmaker who I think she makes most of her money at the NFB. Most of the projects are there, but they're like it's a documentary space. Now, in terms of private investment, that more or less doesn't happen here in the way that it does in the
I guess this broadcasters.
But a broadcast license, I mean, you know as well as anybody, but within Canada, here's a very quick film financing lesson if anybody cares. So when you go to make a movie, I'll use Operation Avalanche as an example, okay? So you have this idea for a movie. Great, then we'll go back to your friend Mike. So Mike's going to make this movie, okay? And here's how you're going to finance it. Okay, if you're Canadian, your options are go to Telefilm. Telefilm will give you 35% of your budget. That's awesome. Like nobody else gets that. So you get 35% of your budget. Then you can say 25% of your budget from tax credits. That's money that the government's going to give you back for what you spend. So now you're around 60%. And then normally in this country, what you do is if there's a movie star or something in it, you'll do a pre-sale of the rights of your movie to some foreign territory, like maybe France or a collection of them. And then you'll be like, hey, Mike is making this movie and it's starring, we'll say Sarah Polley, whatever, you just screen that movie, although that's not going to move the needle. We'll just say. And so then, like some countries are like, okay, yeah, when that's done, we'll buy it. And we'll buy it for whatever, $30,000 for our little territory. Because the whole world is chopped up into territories. That's why Netflix Canada is different than Netflix US. And then you sell that contract to a bank, and there you go. Now you're ready to make your movie, okay? So like pre-sale financing, debt financing is what they call it, is the only real way to make movies in this country. It's not, we don't have a studio distribution system like they have in the United States, where a place like Universal or Warner Brothers, or in this case, Lionsgate, can be like, we're making it, we don't care, we're putting our own money into it, and we're gonna risk the balance of this movie on its box office. That doesn't exist, which is one of the reasons why the filmmaking in this country is so tepid, because the people taking the big swings and the big risks on young voices, on new movies, on weird stories, is the Canadian government. So when Mike goes to them and they're like, I'm making a movie and it's, I don't know, like what's an awesome movie that they would never fund that was made in the States, like pick one. Or any movie that's like moving the needle that makes you go, cool, I've never seen that before. You can rest assured that like a bureaucrat in this country is going to be like, I've never seen that before. Not cool, right? It's like the exact opposite. So the other options are find a way to fund this yourself, or find a way to bring your budget down so low that you can work within the system here. It doesn't hurt you. Is the answer to that. Quebec is similar, but what Quebec does that English-speaking Canada doesn't do is that they have a really, really, really great talent development program. Like they really do try to work with young filmmakers, except they give them a lot of money to make shorts. You know what SODEC is, right? So SODEC is basically like a whole other Telefilm with just as much money that's also trying to fund young filmmakers. So it's a very different system, but at the upper echelons, something called the national program. I mean, none of you guys care about this. It's so crazy, the bifurcation of the Canadian funding system. But in English-speaking Canada, yes, all the money is going to the exact same production companies and the exact same directors that you could probably name, right? And anything they ask for, more or less, they're going to get, because again, the system is risk-averse, extremely risk-averse. And how can they turn down a filmmaker who was really big in the 80s, right? It's like a very difficult bureaucratic decision to make. And so what we were trying to do is get them to make basically one less big tentpole Canadian movie a year, and instead make 50 movies by people like you, right? And like that was the exchange we were trying to pressure Telefilm to make. Like, let's make one less huge bloated feature that everybody hates, nobody watches, and goes nowhere, and instead try to develop 50 young people every single year who maybe they're horrible, like maybe 40 of the movies are garbage, right? Like maybe Mike really did screw up his movie, but at the very least, it'll be developing people in the way that Quebec develops their filmmakers. Which, and they're not amazing at it, but they do it better than we do. And yes, there's a clubbiness, like if you aren't working with those production companies that I was just talking about, like you basically have no access to Telefilm. It's a Canadian company, so you can apply and do all these things, but it is just like film festivals, 100% about relationships, right? Your relationships with the people at Telefilm is what's going to dictate your access to funding.
Just to steer us back to your film you just watched, or even just your films in general. Almost all your films, you play a filmmaker or a filmmaker-like character.
Yeah.
And there's also just a lot of use of American media, especially on your TV show, the show. A show set in Toronto, but then constantly using American media, almost like you're stealing it, almost like there's a game of using making Star Wars or Jurassic Park.
Uh-huh.
And then, you know, deciding to make a film about NASA and a very American moment. Is there a tension you're attracted to of being a Canadian and being able to sort of take over American media or utilize it?
It's funny because I don't think about it as American media, I just think of it as pop culture.
Pop culture, yeah.
And I'm sure it's the same way a lot of you guys think, but you're not thinking about in the same way that, I mean, maybe I'm alone, but you don't think about Pokemon as like Japanese culture. It's Pokemon. It's just fucking cool, right? Like,
And it's also personal too. There's always a filmmaker character and a sort of moment of documentary discovery, and then that blend of pop culture, American culture, but in a Canadian context. Is there something?
I don't think it.
To me, that's makes something collision, or I feel like I haven't seen that very often before.
Well, yeah, you know what? I mean, psychologically, sure, maybe there is. Like that is one of the reasons why I'm like, oh my gosh, is this what the cool people like? Oh my gosh, let me surround myself with these like approved things. Like maybe that is like there's some kind of Canadian inferiority complex with wearing a coat full of pop culture that makes you seem like, well, I must be cool. Look at all these cool references, right? Like, and so all these characters are pathetic in that way, which I think maybe is getting at like some kind of Canadian versus the world thing, but I'm not conscious of that outside of my own obsession with media generally. But again, I think I wouldn't draw a distinction between American media and again, Pokemon. Like that's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same thing to me, right? And even if there was, like, if you watch even just all of Nirvana the band, like they also watch like cartoons made in Canada, like the Raccoons is in a lot of the show. All of the
But to me, I see that intermingling with these sort of
so do I.
like taking the Canadian for this. And it's also just because it's the particular area that it's the idiosyncrasy of your own perspective, and then blending that in a larger context.
Yeah, but
It happens to be Canadian, but I feel like that's part of it. I mean, so for me, seeing raccoons alongside Home Alone or whatever, that's kind of cool. I mean,
I think it's cool too.
but you certainly see that as Canadian media, not just media, no?
Yes, I do. But and the reason we put that kind of stuff in the show, or the reason we thought that this Christopher movie matinee stuff was so wicked to put in here, is because I suppose that it is kind of like there's a kind of prankstery tricks to
We see Calvin and Yona, Canadian filmmakers as astronauts.
Yes.
I mean, that's sort of an inside joke, but still feels like there's something there, right?
Well, I love disguises.
We see York University.
Yeah, York University, the whole movie is shot at York University. Yeah, and so there is something cool about that.
Question.
Just to build on that, you talk a lot about using copyrighted material. I think I saw a TIFF video of you and your co-star for No Avalanche, the band, the show, where you talk about how you get away with that stuff. And even though like a lot of this stuff is Canadian, there was like an episode based on like a GoldenEye tournament that you guys have.
Yes.
Can you talk about how you get away with some of that stuff?
Yeah, and in fact, it's what I learned making my first feature. This question is basically about like the legal rights that you have as filmmakers, which I was not so interested in when I was your age. And as soon as I made my first feature, I really had to learn the hard way that like one of the things you're probably learning in film school is what you can and can't do, right? I bet you're hearing like, oh, you can't use like this kind of music, or you can't shoot without a permit, or that you need permission from all the people that you put on screen. Like these are just kind of, they're almost like cliches of being in film school. At least they were to me. Like they were the things that were really drilled into my head. And it's so funny how related this is to this question you just asked me about being like, oh, do you think you're a real prankster being a Canadian, putting all this American media in these things? But I was so sick of what my professors were telling me and what I was allowed and what I was not allowed to do in film school for the 4 years that I did undergrad at York University, that as soon as I graduated, I was like, I'm going to just make something that I would never be able to make in film school, which is just all shot illegally, all without permission, and I'm going to use so much copywritten material, and I'm going to call it Nirvana the band. Like I'm going to call it something illegal. Like I'm going to make something that I actually wouldn't be allowed to make because that would just be funny to me. And then I did, and we were making it as a web show. Like I grew basically your age. I was 21 or something when we were making it, and I made that show with my friends for 3 years, and then taught myself how to basically make movies in that way. And then when we went to make a feature, we just continued that same philosophy, not caring about whether or not we'd be able to sell it. Because at no point were we ever selling that web series, and I wasn't thinking I was going to sell this first movie. Like, I just didn't care. I was too stupid. Like, I just didn't understand. And then when it premiered at Slamdance and won that festival, and then people started wanting to buy it from us, I was faced with this, oh my God, now I'm not quite so smart, am I? I made a movie that's illegal and you can't sell, and it breaks all these rules, but now I want to be able to sell it and be a professional adult. But it turned out that, like, by the hand of God, I have no idea how this happened, but somehow in America, the laws of fair use, basically what you can use without permission, were extremely open to exactly this kind of filmmaking, which is take your influences, take things in media that are relevant to you, whatever they are, and so long as they are truly necessary to tell your story, right? I mean truly necessary. Take this movie as a great example. It was very necessary that we showed the moon landing, right? It's a movie about the moon landing. It was very necessary that we shot at NASA, right? Because the movie set at NASA. It was very necessary that we had that parade footage and we could show that stuff. And because from a narrative point of view, we really needed it, the law says, okay, you can use it for free. And that really is cruel. And it stands against what we learned in film school in a way that if I had been taught that, I probably would have been like, oh, and I'm not doing that. It's allowed. That's not cool. But that is what happened. And so the answer is, if you are trying to use copyrighted material in your own work, if you have a very good narrative reason for doing it, you can. But you need a lawyer to prove all of it. Okay, this question was like, how do you steal shots? Like how we steal shots.
It's complicated too, because there's the practical element of literally stealing, but then there's also the comedian element of working with an actor and blending actors and non-actors. Like, I think a key thing to point out about Matt and his films is you're typically working with a non-actor cast. And then, I mean, that film is an American film.
Yes.
But if you were to steal a shot where it's with ACTRA, everybody in the background would have to get back out of an ACTRA.
With Operation Avalanche, yes. I mean, I'll tell you, we shot 40.
So budget of dirties was 20,000, 30,000?
No, it was 10. Like, in terms of money we spent, it's a complicated question because we had to spend a lot more money after we actually sold it.
And then money offers.
Yeah.
But then budget for Operation
It was like $1.2 million Canadian, which is like astronomically more money. But we tried to shoot with the same principles. The problem was we were spending money on insane shit, like 60mm film and old cameras and old lenses, like stuff. It was so unbelievably expensive, and just the processing was like a lot of the money was going to things that we were like, oh, this is crazy. But our aesthetic was still the same. In terms of false starts, yes. So the best advice I can give you on filmmakers, if this is something you're really interested in doing, especially in like at the independent level, is find a way that you can keep shooting after you're quote unquote done. Because this is how you're going to fix all your problems. Operation Avalanche, technically we probably shot for 120 days. Because we shot the whole movie with a huge crew, wasted all this money, spent so much money. Basically, I'd say we spent $800,000 shooting for 40 days or 50 days straight in the summer. We did a cut of that, and we were like, oh my God, this is so brutal. We were able to fix like 40 things, and then we went out and shot another like 80 days with no crew and nothing, with just like the absolute bare minimum of stuff to try to fill in story gaps. So I would say that is, and Kaz is the king of this, like absolutely, like if you watch his films, like the reason they have flow is because he's able to go out and shoot. If this didn't work, he throws it away. If something did work, okay, yeah, I want to pursue that. Yeah, I mean, I was on set when you last.
Yeah, again, we talked a lot about documentary, and that's the documentary influence.
Yes.
And it's something that happened. I remember just when I was reading about Nobody Wave Goodbye. There is no industry, right? There's no film. There's no actors. So you also have to find performances by working with non-actors.
It takes forever.
You need to rely on these things too, and there aren't these industry standards. The reason why things are shot quickly in Hollywood and all.
It's because it's so expensive.
And you work with Brad Pitt and tons of money. But if you're not, and there isn't this system, then you have a bunch of time. Yeah.
And time is a resource.
Yes.
And you, as a young person, have more time than you could possibly imagine. You have no idea how much time you have. You have more time now in your life today than you will ever have once you are like a hardcore adult. And that time is worth so much money. So use it, right? use it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to ask, you mentioned earlier that you actually went to NASA to film. Like,
Well, this film is shot.
Tell us like the documentary moments, or just the real things that.
Well, so when you see us pull up to NASA and walk in and talk with those NASA staff, like that's all completely legitimate. So we told them that we were film students making a documentary about the moon landing. So we lied to them and said, I'm a student here at the university and I'm trying to make a documentary about the moon landing. And it's just another, this is, I would say, another gift of being Canadian, that we were able to say, oh, we're Canadian, don't worry about us. We basically just want to take a tour for a few days and talk with some of you guys for this student documentary that we're making. And then every single time they left the room, or every single time that we had time to ourselves, we would shoot scenes. So that scene of us at Mission Control, I don't remember what we did, but we asked if they could get it. Oh, man. I should know this because obviously it's so seminal to us, but basically we had 5 minutes in that mission control room where they actually sent the rocket up to the moon, and we knew basically what the scene was going to be, and this was a big thing that we came to do. So as soon as the door closed, we just got into our positions and started acting. And they never really asked why we were dressed like we were in the 1960s. We were like peculiar people, but everything that you see where we're interacting with people that seem like they're not actors, that's shot at NASA in Galveston, Texas. So
It's like a guy with a southern drawl.
yeah, that was the main photographer of the Apollo program.
So he's the real guy. He
Yeah.
was in the film, or he didn't know
Well, he was in a documentary.
He thought he was just talking to very curious film students.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
What was the reaction of the people that didn't realize that it was?
Of NASA, it's funny. It was mixed. Wired did a big article about it when it came out, basically saying that NASA was super, super pissed. But NASA is not one person. Do you know what I mean? Like NASA is a huge group of people, and the ones that we really like fooled is like the tiniest group. Like they're not talking about going to the moon anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like these people don't do anything at NASA anymore. They're basically like the librarians of NASA. And so that dude who's in the movie was pretty stoked because he loved movies, and he was like, "Whoa, I'm gonna," like he was stoked. But I think the official party line is that they were extremely upset, and I'm sure that they're a government organization. So our lawyer basically said, "Look, whatever you do, they won't sue you, because unless you go and really commit a heinous crime or you do something to hurt them, they won't sue you, because what's in it for them? Like they're not going to waste government money. They're so broke as it is." But the reaction officially was quite bad. In that Wired article, Wired was trying to get them to like basically say that they were trying to stir up drama, but no, they were pissed. But you know what else was going to yeah.
Even though it was all like flying through law or whatever, fair use law, did it make it difficult to sell the movie to a larger studio like Lionsgate, even though it was law abiding, but maybe they didn't want to ruffle the feathers by going that far against fair use law?
Well, sure, but this gets into the idea of what you're going to tell your financing partners, because you're under no obligation to disclose the types of things that I would disclose here or now that the movie's out, right? Like you're always sort of trying to con everybody in a way, and so you don't sit down with your distributor and go, "Now look, NASA's definitely going to sue you, and all we did was break the law. Isn't that cool? And none of this stuff is cleared, and we're just doing that because we think we're so awesome. Now you get to be awesome too." And you're saying that's like the head of business affairs at Lionsgate? No. What you say is the film is insured, everything is cleared, and here's the finished, here's our deliverables, right? You don't pitch it in terms of its illegality. Now, sometimes that can turn into a creative conversation. Like, I'm going to make a movie that's very difficult to make, and it's going to be shot at NASA, and then your distributor says, "How are you going to do that?" And you can say, "Well, we're thinking about doing this and this and this, and this is how we might do it." And maybe you can get them on board, which is also part of what we did with Lionsgate. But that really all anybody wants is insurance. Like, as long as you have insurance, then you're more or less good. Now, if you're doing flagrantly illegal stuff and just barely getting away with it, then maybe you get in, like maybe some distributors will be like, "Oh, this is too crazy for us." In an episode of one of the show, we stole a bunch of stuff from the WWE, like a John Cena's theme song, and one of our distributors, like internationally, was like, "There's no way we're doing that. Like we carry all the WWE's stuff, And they had a big problem with that, but in the end, they still created.
Going off that, so do you? It sounds like you don't deliver like a final script. You kind of just make the movie and the
Right.
story as you go along. And like, how do you get that past producers and distributors? Like, do you just?
want to talk about how you got the funding for this? Or was that Sundance?
That's not when we got the funding. We got the funding basically because the Dirties had been enough of a hit that I was getting asked to pitch new movies to different distributors in the United States, and I had the idea for this movie. This was like right after we finished, like we screened the Dirties, and just in passing, I had said that, I want to make this movie about these guys faking the moon landing, and it was just the executives at Lionsgate who I met with who just thought that was exciting. It was, maybe it was a miracle. I had no idea why they said yes, but for whatever reason they thought, this is a good idea, let's do this. And it was so little money from an American perspective, like $1.2 million. It was just like $1 million from them. It's like nothing. It's like nothing from them, right? It's like basically what they would pay for 5 drafts of a script, right? That they're putting through development. So here, that's another thing that we've heard about, like being an independent filmmaker, is that for the budgets that a lot of Americans would use just for packaging and polishing scripts, oftentimes you can shoot an entire pilot of a TV show, or you can shoot an entire movie for what they normally spend on development. And that is a really great weapon to use when you're trying to pitch something, where you're saying, I can get you the whole movie for what you would normally spend just developing something over here. And yeah, maybe it tanks and you lose all your money, but you lose that much money developing garbage projects every month. So why not do this? And then maybe it's really cool and maybe you guys really like it. And maybe it plays at a festival that gives you prestige. Like there's all kinds of things you can use to bargain with people like that to get money.
Question for you. Again, to bring it back to telefilm and young filmmakers in this program, the Talent Watch program. You're a filmmaker, your process is very idiosyncratic and very unique to you, and you kind of designed it around yourself. What have you learned from seeing 2 years of
Only 2. Yeah.
And like success stories, what's worked, what hasn't worked? Just looking at Canada, there's Murmur, which was
yes, that's a good example, and I think that Ashley McKenzie's film Werewolf that I think you guys are watching next week follows a similar path, very low budget, and it's built around it. So, what you hit the nail on the head, which is that, as I was saying before, finding a context within which the way that you shoot makes sense, this is the absolute number one thing you can do, is basically finding the box that you can play in, where all of your weaknesses are actually strengths, which maybe sounds stupid, but right now, if you look at yourself as a filmmaker realistically, you have nothing, right? You're all nobody. You have no access to anybody who's like a real actor. You have basically no experience shooting movies, right? You basically have no experience writing movies. Like these are all just realities that you're going to face that are still in many ways true of myself and Kaz, right? Like we're not so experienced, but there are things that you have that no one else has, right? Nobody else in the world has, which is like your own life, what it is that you grew up around, and all those inexperiences can actually be turned on their head to make your voice extremely authentic. And so the movies that are working well out of that program are the ones that fully embrace that.
And you even said yourself, you were looking for those tensions when you were making Operation Avalanche.
Yes.
That when you first made the Dirties, you had to scramble. And then when you had a bit more money and were trying to make a period piece, you were trying to find something to pivot off of.
Well, there's a reason why we didn't just make a bigger budget movie that was all in the same constraints as the Dirties. We tried to make something that was going to be extremely difficult for us, which is basically setting in the 60s and 70s. And the movies, in my opinion, this is the reason that 99% of Canadian movies are so horrible, is that they aren't trying to play to their own strengths, they're trying to approximate what they think American movies are.
And Americans find that boring.
And they also,
that's like right at the bottom. And
exactly.
These aren't things that are special. These aren't things that are exciting. The audience has seen this before, and it's sort of the lowest, the most vanilla, basic, straightforward version of something that we're used to seeing.
They're completely neutered. And the uncanny valley is so real. There's something about not having the resources of like even a $10 million American film that a Canadian movie with $500,000, or we'll take Talent to Watch as an example, $150,000. If you only have $150,000 to make a feature, why would you even pretend to do a movie with normal coverage and normal lighting?
But people do that.
Of course they do, and they obliterate their opportunity. They basically are like, well, I'm good enough. I'm a great filmmaker now, and so I can play the exact same game that these other people play, even though I have no experience and no money, which is insane.
It's a funny thing to rationalize. That $150,000 is sort of nothing in the grand scheme of things compared to $1 million or $3 million. But again, it's someone's life savings.
Exactly.
You know, and it's someone like multiple people's life savings. If you're actually to fund this yourself, it could ruin you and all your friends. That does happen.
Right.
But yeah, if you can actually spend it the way you want to and cater to how you want to shoot a film, it's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
It's huge, but you need to find a way to make it a huge amount of money and not nothing. Because if all of a sudden you're working with no money, you're dead. Again, I'll go back to this idea that the resource you have more than anybody, you have more of this than anybody in the world, is time. You have so much of it. You could spend 3 years shooting your first feature and nobody's gonna be like, oh my God, that guy's got control. 3 years? Who's his AD? Like, nobody is going to say this, ever. Yeah.
Can you speak to trying to get funding for a second feature?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say worry about that when you get there, that's for sure. Because like, what you should be focused on 100% is your first feature. But second feature funding, I would say, is 100% dependent on how well you do your first time out. Now in Canada, we started a program that I'd say is really, really great in that sense, which is that if you have a first feature that screens at any of the top 5 festivals in the world, which is to say Sundance, Venice, Berlin, Cannes, and there's a 5th one in there. I don't know.
Yeah, your second feature gets funded.
Your second feature.
The first person to qualify for that, we're screening next class.
Is Ashley
World. Ashley Kazik.
Yeah, so she was the first person to ever get this grant, and it's $500,000 to then make whatever you want. Like, you don't have to submit an application.
Is she shooting right now?
Yeah, she is. So you can ask, well, she's not coming in. I was going to say you could ask her what she thinks about that, but that in Canada, I would say that's a great way to get second feature funding. But outside of that, oh my God, it's hard. Here's another stark reality of the filmmaking world. Your first feature has so much currency because it's your first feature. Film festivals around the world have non-stop categories and prizes for first features. First time director. Oh my gosh, you won't believe this new director. Oh my gosh, this new voice. There are exactly 0 prizes for second directors, right? No, like you're not new anymore. So bear that in mind. Andrew Sigadino, the guy who directed Sleeping Giant, got told a really great story. And it was that a filmmaker had just finished this feature and Andrew Sigadino was there watching the screening of it in a room like this. So we'll say it's happening right now. We'll say it's Mike. I love this guy, Mike. And so Mike just screened this movie for us. And there's a bunch of filmmakers there who are his buddies. And he's like, okay, so what should I do with it? And one of the guys said, you should just bury it and never let anybody know you made it and just use it as a learning experience and move on. Because it's not good enough to be your first feature, and you do not want to waste the currency of your first feature on this. That's what the filmmaker did. And that again is one of these like, oh my God, that's brutal. Yeah. But it really speaks to the power of having a first feature, because people will pay attention because all of a sudden you're new. You are new and this is your voice, right? Like that is really, really powerful.
First of all, thank you so much, Matt, for coming in and
You mean
talking.
last time?
We should probably go.
Yes, exactly.
This sort of something. Our last question, and then maybe chat.
If you're shooting digital, you have non-actors, whatever, where's that money going and how much money do you realistically need for like a 7-minute feature?
So if you are really thinking about shooting something with no money, here are things that, and Kaz is probably better than this person, I am, to be honest. But where you're going to spend money, if this is you're shooting with your friends, okay, you just need to begin there. Like if you're paying crew for all the time that they're there and you're not all in it together, then all your money's going to go into salaries. Well,
it's like step 1. No one should be losing money.
yeah.
So
Nobody
it's
should be
like
paying you money to do it. Like
yeah.
that's the first thing.
If actors are working for free, you pay for the transportation.
And you pay for all their food. That's where all your money's going to go for the most part. It's transportation.
Next up, I would say is camera. So you can always shoot. So maybe from there, I would invest in a camera.
Buy a camera. That's what we've always done. That's what Kaz always does. Like, so, because rentals are going to kill you. Because as I said, the function of using your time, which is more or less endless, becomes very limited when you're paying for every minute you shoot because you need to rent your gear. So find a way that you can own, and it doesn't. You don't need to have like an Alexa. Like you can buy the shittiest possible camera and still make an amazing movie, right? So own the camera that you're shooting on for sure. Even we were making a Ron Man show the web series people in that. And it's so key because then it's like, okay, we have it. We can make everything work around this.
Yeah,
And then, like, I guess
I would say then there's no answer. There really is no answer. It's all about knowing your collaborators and it's knowing what they need to be okay.
maybe you have some set pieces or something.
Pieces
you're trying to
to
pay
be,
for.
yeah, for me, it's like people get paid very like different amounts. Like our editor gets paid so much more because of how many hours she puts in. But also just like the mental strain of it. Like we don't want her working at a job. We want her to be able to focus and be. So it's just like learning her and how much she needs. But that's definitely not true about every film. Every film would have a different process. But I would say if you're under 250,000, it's completely different on every film. And it's like whatever the collaboration, the nature of the film necessitates that there's a million answers. But it's knowing your collaborators and understanding why they're making the film
And why they're working with
what they need to be able to be successful. Yeah.
There's a great documentary called Overnight, which I recommend every film student watch. This is the story of that movie, what was that Quentin Tarantino rip-off movie about the two Boondock Saints?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So the director of this film, The Boondock Saints, gets this deal from Harvey Weinstein in the late 90s. And it's like, you get to make this movie. And he says, I know what the guy who like works in a bar. And the documentary about this guy making that movie is like the absolute what not to do as a director. And I don't mean creatively. I mean in terms of your interpersonal relationships with your friends. You should all watch this movie. It's hilarious. It's made by these two guys who were his like close friends and now hate his guts, and used the documentary to get revenge on him. So it's very one-sided. But it basically shows all the things you can do wrong in terms of working with your first crew, which is over-promising things, basically telling everybody that they're going to be rich and famous, just work for free because the pot of gold is going to be at the end of this rainbow. Like, there's lots of mistakes that you can make that can cripple your friendships. But if everybody really is trying to get something out of it, maybe this is actually a decent anecdote to end on, because it is very, very true in the film production world, okay? If someone's trying to become a cinematographer, if they're trying to become an editor, if they want to be a producer, if they want to be a director, or if they want to be an actor, right? Like, these are like the big filmmaking jobs. Like, everybody wants to, or even an art director, okay? Like, if you really do want to be those things, and you want to be able to say, I am that, okay? Right? I'm an actor, right? There's two ways you can do it, okay? This is true of all these jobs. You can work like as an apprentice, or you can work your way up through the DGC, and you can work your way up in the camera union, and you can assist for a cinematographer who's working, and slowly rise the ranks, and then you really will eventually become this thing that you're trying to be, right? And you really will be. Or you can make a movie on your own and get it into a film festival, and then it doesn't need to be sold, it just needs to be well reviewed, and congratulations, you are that. You could have never done it before in your life. And if you shoot a movie that plays at a big festival, congratulations, you have just as much of a right to call yourself a cinematographer as Robbie Deakins. Like, you're in the same class. And so if you can offer that to people in a realistic way, that's very enticing, because that is a fast track right to the big leagues, right? Like, hey, I'm the person who acted in that movie that just played Sundance. Oh yeah, you can come back there, maybe you're clearly an actor. Right? Hey, I just shot that movie that just played at Cannes. Oh my God, do you want to shoot this movie for me? I'm Steven Spielberg. Right? Like, you skip right to the head of the line, and it's not like irregular. Like, that's how you become the real thing in the blink of an eye. But just as easily, you could also be a joke who tried to make a movie that was horrible and you just like Mike, right? And so that is the balancing act of working in, like, as a young person trying to become a professional, is that the two roads you have are you can really work hard and work within the unions and try to work your way up, which is, there's nothing wrong with it, that's actually great. But you can also take a really big risk with other like-minded young people, and there is a chance that overnight you all become the thing that you want to be, which is scary because then, I mean, you basically are an imposter. You did it once, right? Like, now you have to do it again, except in a professional setting, but that's really, really fun. And I encourage all of you to at least try.
That's a good note to end.
Yes, exactly.
Please, yeah, round of applause.